a Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart, and for the last 40 years I've interviewed thousands of veterans about their experience of war. Join me on a journey through the pages of history. Welcome to Peter Hart's Military History. Hi, and welcome to the latest issue of Peter Hart's Military History podcast. I've got it right, hooray for me. And as ever, I'm with my pal Gary Bain, who is here to keep me on the straight and narrow, he tells me.
Well, that's going to take some doing, I would think.
We'll try our best. Once again, we're at Bain Towers, which is a lovely little spot where you've made a life, haven't you, Gary?
Yeah, it might not be to everybody's choice living in White Hart Lane under the shadow of the Spurs ground, but it's my choice.
Yeah, well, it's your choice to live here, is it? I thought it was Janet. Anyway, today we've got some of these podcasts. People say, "Oh, you keep saying you're keen on things." This one I'm really excited by because it's one of my all-time heroes, and there are two First World War aces that float my boat. One's McLachlan and the other one is our subject of today, Mannock. Edward Mannock, VC.
So, can we start then? Who was Mick Mannock?
Mick Mannock. Mick, Paddy, variety of other nicknames. I hate, as you well know, and you've done that deliberately, I hate people who... everyone who called him Mick or Paddy or the rest of it is dead. They were his friends. We're not his friends. So I prefer Edward, if you don't mind. Having said that, as you are well aware, in about 2 minutes, I'm going to call him Mick Mannock by mistake, because it's very easily done. Who was Edward Mannock? Christ, that was nearly an early fall. Well, he was born the 24th of May, 1887, from an unusual family. His grandfather was quite well off and a newspaper editor, the rest of it. But his dad was also, unimaginatively, although depends which way you look at it, all called Edward Mannock, was a soldier, a corporal. And his mother was Irish, Julia Mannock. And his dad was, I don't know, not an attractive character to many people. Certainly, he'd served bravely, presumably bravely in that sense. Fought in the Anglo-Egyptian War, served in India, where Mannock went with him, and then he fought in the Boer War. And after that, the family moved back to England and to Canterbury. Very swish, very, very swish. And Canterbury will claim Mannock as their own. He's got a monument in the cathedral, which I've seen. And their monument? Oh, well, it's something in the cathedral. And here, his father deserted them. And that's why Mannock did not like him. And, and that's where he settled. He was an interesting lad in the sense that isn't everybody interesting, but he was a pretty normal bloke, keen on sports. Shooting, airgun, like saints, they always try and make out some, their previous lives to sort of show what was going to come. So he was apparently a great shot on the air rifle, which sort of showed what would happen in the future. I'm not sure about all that. He played the violin. He was very musical, piano, violin, that kind of thing. I think that was his mother's influence. Well, it must have been because his dad had left. School. I can't remember. I love historians who can't remember things. Well, I can't remember how he did at school. But he left and worked for the National Telephone Company, first in the offices, and then he got bored, wanted outdoor life, and went to work at the engineering department of the same firm in Wellingborough in 1911. This is all a bit reading from notes, but there you go. At that point, he joined as a territorial with the Royal Army Medical Corps, and he was indeed promoted to sergeant in 1913. Now, that shows, that's, commitment to things pretty good. Another great commitment of his was one that's rather closer to my heart. And guess what that was, Gary, if you can?
Liverpool?
No. The mighty Liverpool don't appear to have been close to... That wasn't quite what I was expecting. No, that's you. These things aren't scripted, folks. No. He was a left-wing socialist. And he was the secretary of the Wellingborough Independent Labour Party from 1912 onwards. And although he's a very strong believer in empire, socialists weren't quite the same then as they are now. They believed in country and empire rather more than Our lot do at the moment. But he was very left-wing, and for his time, noticeably so, which is unusual. It's an unusual feature of a First World War flying ace, if you see what I mean. He sought adventure. February 14, pretty bad time in this. He sailed to Turkey, to Constantinople, Istanbul, where he worked with the Ottoman Telephone Exchange. A fine body of men, I'm sure. And on the outbreak of war, he was probably interned as an enemy subject. Here his health declined. He got dysentery, upset tummy of various sorts. He was ill, very ill. Although I find this interesting because he was repatriated because he was so ill, in April 1915. And in the next month,
immediately he volunteers for
one
service.
of those wondrous cures, that you see people taken into court with a Zimmer frame and everything. And then next minute, Zimmer, after they've been, they don't need it. He came back to England and recovered miraculously. Went back to the Field Ambulance Service, Royal Army Medical Corps, and he got transferred, hoping to be an officer cadet with the Royal Engineers, seeking to better himself. He was upwardly mobile, in contrast to his father, perhaps. Didn't like it much, and he got a transfer to the Royal Flying Corps, RFC, where he was eventually commissioned as a second lieutenant. And in August 1916, he began to attend the No. 1 School of Military Aeronautics in Reading. Now, this is where he learnt how to fly. And it's not just flying. You have to learn about aeroplane. How do airplanes work? Different. It's the wingy things in an engine, I think. But, they have to learn about engines, have to learn about flying, the theory of flight, and then they start to learn how to fly. They start flying those Morris Shorthorns or Longhorns. Don't ask me. What is the difference between them? Well, it's the length of the sausage. That'll do for now, if you know what I mean. And he starts to, he's basically learning to fly, and presumably
he's much older than his contemporaries because he's born 1887.
What a memory you have.
He must be much older.
He is. He's 28. And, that's half your age now. But 28 is old. He's distinctly older than most of his contemporaries. The people who are going through flying training with him are normally 18, 19, 20. That is the age of people. Some are even younger than that, although they've been very naughty boys. But he is older, distinctly older, and he's got more life experience and more... Well, I'm not sure Mannock was ever mature, but he's more maturity.
So, forgive me, how did he get accepted into the Royal Flying Corps? Because one of the things that he was described as, I think, is the ace with one eye. So, did he have an eye problem? How did he get in?
This is one of the great myths of Mannock. I've not seen his medical report. As I understand it, and one of the famous biographies is called The Ace with One Eye. I think that's by one of it. But as I understand it, and it wouldn't make such a good title for the publisher, it's The Ace with a very slight astigmatism in one eye. And you can see that it doesn't quite fit on the page, the title page is Ace with worry. So, there does seem to have been a problem with his eye, possibly caused when he was in India. He had malaria and a variety of other things, Possibly he had a slight astigmatism in one eye, but he is not one-eyed. And the same people who call him that also refer to his amazing air vision. And if he didn't have stereoscopic vision, i.e. both eyes working, you couldn't do what he could. You can't judge distance with one eye in the air. So I think that's over-exaggerated. So in the end, he goes out to join 40 Squadron. 40 Squadron. Now 40 Squadron, are a scout squadron. Scouts are what we would call now fighter squadron, and they are basically, their job is to protect the people who are doing the real work. Now, we did discuss this in a previous podcast when we talked about the birth of military flying in 1914. These people, so the roles of the Air Force are aerial reconnaissance and photography, most of all aerial photography, which allows the people to determine, that phone's still not off, to determine the shape of what's going on the ground, to identify targets, and artillery observation. Now, that's the real work. The scouts were there to protect them from German scouts and to shoot down those German scouts. That's the role of the scouts. It is a secondary role. The real, most important role is carried out by what we call the core aircraft, the ones doing the basic functions. But the scouts were there to protect them and to shoot down the German scouts and, of course, the German reconnaissance and artillery observation things. So it's a secondary role, but it's still really important. And it's really risky. And what were they flying? What were they flying? Well, they were flying a nice little single-seater fighter called the Newport Scout. And they were based at first. He joins them on 6th of April 1917 at the airfield at the airfield. Hang on, that's a bit of a tongue twister. The airfield at airfield. Yes. Mastered that. Now, this is a strange time for the Royal Flying Corps. Well, can you remember your? I know you read all my books. I expect you remember my book, Bloody April.
So I'm thinking Bloody April. So Arras was presumably kicking off, if you'll pardon the expression. There must have been a role for the scout aircraft, if nothing else.
Yeah, shooting. They had all those functions to do, because our core aircraft, the ones doing the real work, were being shot down hand over fist by Manfred von Richthofen and his Jaster 11 and the other German pilots. It was a cruel time, and it was called Bloody April because they had literally hundreds, two or three. I think it's 350 deaths, which is nothing, by the way, compared to what's going on the ground. So on the ground, if something goes wrong, you can lose 1,000 men in one brigade, But here, what's happening is they're performing a function for the men on the ground.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I may well be wrong, but I think that there was a real tactical need to destroy the German kite balloons as well.
Yeah, yes, yes, they have to shoot it because they're in the air all the time and they can look and see what we're doing. So that is crucially important, and that will be one of Mannock's early jobs, doing that. And we will come on again to that. But fundamentally, shooting down kite balloons is a new role and dangerous. Come to that, but it's just this business of escorting our core aircraft and shooting down German aircraft. Now, when he got there, he was older, as you spotted. He's older. He's imaginative. That's a problem in soldiers, and he's highly intelligent. That's also a problem. That's unfair. That's going for the cheap joke there. And he found it difficult to ignore the risks. Now, the thing about when you go out, you've got this new single-seater airplane. They're highly manoeuvrable, and you take off. You've had some training. You've learned how to fly, and you've had some tactical training. Some practice with a sort of air fighting school, but not much. And when you get up there, you've got all these interrelated things connected. And if you think about it, Gary, you've got to be able to fly the aeroplane and make it do what you want immediately, accurately, in the round, in a 360-degree surrounding thing. And
at the time, presumably, he would be considered a novice.
He was a novice, precisely. So, although he could fly, if you're going to have to turn left sharply, can you do it immediately without thinking? Can you dive? Can you do all these things? And while you're doing it, can you at the same time work out your approach, what they call the classic fighter scout approach, to an enemy so that they can't get you? Learn to approach from beneath, behind the tail with a two-seater aircraft so that the rear gunner doesn't get you. Keep out of the way of the pointy bit at the front, or the pilot will get you. You've got to think about, if you're in a flight, you've got to think of formation flying. You fly close together so you magnify your offensive potential. But, hang on a minute, what happens if those wingy things touch each other? Well, they come off. And then you're in trouble at 10,000 feet. So, and then, even when you get the German in your sights, you've got to be able to hit them. You've got to be able to shoot accurately. There's lots of different disciplines, none of which come naturally to hardly anybody. This is not something you can just "Oh, I think I'll be a First World War flying ace today." You can't. And that's why a lot of the people killed are beginners.
And also, I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think perhaps later Mannock becomes obsessed with practicing things, and indeed he crashes, I think, whilst practicing diving aircraft. But there were potentially people were dying, not through the combat, but through not being able to control the aircraft.
Yeah, I've got a quote here. He's diving to practice his gunnery. Yeah, and shooting at a target on the ground, just practicing, and then coming out. And he says, in one dive from 2,000 feet, my right bottom plane broke and fell clean away. Managed to right the machine after desperate efforts with a joystick and landed slowly and safely about half a mile from the aerodrome. Such a thing has never happened before, where the pilot has not been killed or injured by the fall. And he goes on. It didn't do his nerves any good. I'm going to come back to this repeatedly. Now I can understand what a tremendous strain to the nervous system active service flying is. However cool a man may be, there must always be more or less of a tension on the nerves under such trying conditions. When it is considered that 7 out of 10 forced landings are practically write-offs and 50% are cases where the pilot is injured, one can understand the strain of the whole business. And he finds it very difficult. Here's a quote from an early thing he did. He went out to escort a bombing raid. Now, bombing's not very important, but it's by this time, contrary to 1914, they are bombing, often aerofields and things like that. And he goes out escorting a group of 9 FE-2Ds. They're two-seaters pushers, so the pilot, the engine's behind them. And he says, I went over the lines for the first time. This is his first mission. Escorting FEs, formation of 6 machines altogether, heavily archied. My feeling's very funny. Archied means anti-aircraft fire. A group burst near me about 100 feet away. I did some stunts quite inadvertently. Lost my leader and deputy leader, but led the patrol down south. Returned safely after a very exciting time. Saw a few hostile aircraft far away, but couldn't get near. And, he says again, he can't get, you're trying to break your duck. I mean, you remember that from your youth. It's very important to break your duck in certain areas, And he's trying to, but he can't, because the Germans, we keep saying that they're outnumbered, that we thought they outnumbered us. They didn't. They were massively outnumbered. And they really went for our artillery observation and reconnaissance aircraft. They'd try and avoid our scouts because there weren't many of them, German fighters, scouts. So they were trying to avoid us. So we couldn't catch them. And then, another offensive patrol this morning with Brown leading. Kept formation grandly, referring to, he's learning, he's keeping formation better. Brown tried to lose me but failed. Observed fires in Lens. Saw 2 formations of hostile aircraft very far away. They won't wait. It's very frustrating because the Germans are fighting a defensive battle. Now, he's gradually learning. Let's talk a bit about the mess. How did he fit into the mess? So, the thing about how he fits into the mess is he's a different class and type to the rest of them. But unlike McCudden, James McCudden, who was also working class, the other most famous British ace, in my view, McCudden was a bit of a loner. He was quieter. I don't want to stereotype. He wasn't exactly quiet, but he was, not as...
And did they know each other, McCudden?
Yes. McCudden had helped train Mannock, and they were friends, and so they were. But they're both working class, essentially working class. But Mannock covered it because he was noisy. In the mess, he was lively, singing, dancing. They'd celebrate anything in the mess. I don't want you to get... They weren't drinking all the time, but they did drink. And they said promotions, departures, a successful mission, birthdays, almost anything could trigger it,
But presumably it let off steam because of the great strain.
Yeah. And this is a quote from Mannock. He goes, another rag in the mess. Box with De Burgh. Crocked my knee and arm. Old McKechnie's farewell night as he's proceeding home tomorrow morning. Great doings! And then this is the bit that I like. Reminds me of my own working life when I was young. Returned to bed at 2 a.m. and to be called at 5:30. Went to St. Omar by sidecar at 6 p.m. to fetch a new machine. Feeling like a wet rag. mouth felt like the bottom of a parrot cage. And we're both laughing because who amongst us, and indeed Matt McLachlan, our dear leader, I mean, who of us hasn't woken up with our mouth feeling like the inside of a parrot cage? Now, they'd often sing songs, and we both love poetry, and this is I've decided that you're not doing enough of these podcasts. So what I want to do is just give you the opportunity to show your poetry reading. And this is a parody of Jabberwocky that they used. That Mannock particularly liked this, and it's in his papers at the RAF Museum. And I think it would be nice now for our listeners to hear you with this. Go ahead, Gary. See how you go. It's a parody.
Thank you, Peter. 'Twas brillig and the slithy quirk did drone and burble in the blue. All floppy were his wing controls and his observer too. Beware the wicked albatross, the OC quirks had told him flat. Beware the hun bird and shun, the frumious Halberstadt. But while through uffish bumps he ploughed, the albatross with tail on high came diving out the Tolby cloud and let his bullets fly. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through. The Lewis gun went tick-a-tack. The Hun was floored, the quirk had scored, and came galumpling back. Oh, hast thou slain the albatross? Split one with me, my beamish boy. Our rayfish scout has found them out. This CO wept for joy.
That was particularly good. I am really impressed by that. The Rayfish Scout is a particularly amusing pun because it's RAF-ish, and that means it doesn't mean the RAF, of course. But what it really means is the Royal Air Force factory. The factory where the Scout, the SE5s and such were built. A lot of Scouts. Now, so Mannock had a reputation. He was quite loud, you know. He was loud, but he had these deep-seated fears. And as he was flying, he still had trouble, and he could not control himself at times. Why do we like Mannock so much? It's partly because he's very human, and I think he shows the fears that normal people would have. This is one quote. He says, "Old Mackenzie goes away on leave today. 14 days. He's in need of it. If ever a lad was cracking up, Mac is. I wonder if I shall ever go like that. I get like that. And what my friends will think of me if I do. Old Paddy, the devil may care with nerves. I feel nervous about it already." And this is one of the things. Being nervous about being nervous is a classic rough manly thing. You're more frightened of being frightened than the enemy often, it seems. And this stress showed. And this is from Captain George Lloyd of his own squadron. And this is really serious. This is unbelievable when you think this is about our greatest air ace. Well, people are saying couldnt, but it's an argument. Mannock was not actually called Yellow, but many secret murmurings of an unsavoury nature reached my ears. I was told that he'd been in the squadron 2 months and he'd shot down one single Hun out of control, and that he showed signs of being over careful during engagements. He was further accused of being continually in the air, practising aerial gunnery as a pretence of keenness. In other words, the innuendo was that he was suffering from cold feet. Now, this Lloyd, he was a flight commander, he confronts Mannock, and Mannock just says, "Yeah, I am scared," but he tried to explain that he saw air fighting. He didn't want to stop. He saw air fighting as a bit of a science. He saw it as something that, with his intelligence, he could master. This is so admirable that I can't believe. It's like he's trying to use his brains to solve the problems that his fears are raising. He was going to study air warfare, and he was going to practice every bit of the skills involved. And gradually he got better and better. And this is, you have things like back to balloons. Sorry, one of his early things is this, and Mannock left an account. A new game that what they decided to do is to get the balloons. Before an offensive, you've got to get them bloody things out of the sky. You've got to get their observation aircraft out, but these blasted balloons are up there all the time.
And it was dangerous.
The defences bloody hell. They've got anti-aircraft guns, they've got machine guns, and they've got these weird things that they're called green onions. Sort of thing my Polly would eat. I've never been a believer in. Being northern, you don't eat vegetables. It's just not something you do. But green onions were fired at them. Oh, that would frighten anyone, I would have thought. And what they used to do is they worked out a technique of flying ultra low level to approach them so that they didn't have any warning. They couldn't get the balloons down. So they'd also be pulling the balloons down if they saw a scout. And Mannock said, a new game's been involved. It involves the art of rushing all out. And by all out, it meant opening the engine throttle to its fullest power around houses, chimneys, barracks, tents, hills and valleys, trees and telegraph poles at a height from the ground of anything less than 10 feet. God almighty. Nothing more exciting could be imagined. And when one considers the speed of these machines, just guess what it means. And of course he's talking about 95, 100, 110 miles an hour. And that doesn't sound much to the modern ear, but Jesus, it was fast in those days, and it must have been terrifying.
And felt faster the closer you were to the ground.
Of course, yeah, because it's just there, isn't it? Now, 3rd of May, here's a real test. He's escorting 4 Sopwith 1.5 strutters. They're one of those aircraft that were just, the 2-seaters, and they had been brilliant in the Battle of the Somme. Well, hey, you'd be going if you were in one. But a year later, you're going, and they're going, where are they going? Well, they're going above Douai. Where's that? That's where Richthofen's Jester 11's based. So this is really dangerous. And they're attacked by a group of German scouts. And Mannock said, I tried my gun before going over the German lines, only to find it was jammed. So I went over with a revolver only, which means effectively nothing.
Unarmed, yeah.
A Hun in a beautiful yellow and green bus. The Germans painted their aircraft lots of different colours, especially Richthofen's Flying Circus, but all of them did. I'm not saying this is from Richthofen's squadron. Attacked me from behind. Caddish German bounder. Of course he did. I could hear his machine gun cracking away. I wheeled round on him and howled like a dervish, although of course he couldn't hear me for moral effect. Another one attacked a Sopwith and Keane blew the pilot to pieces and the Hun went spinning from 12,000 feet to the earth. There was I, a passenger, absolutely helpless, not having a gun, an easy prey to any of them, and they hadn't the grit to close. I came back over Arras with 3 remaining Sopwiths and excellent photos and 2 vacant chairs at the Sopwith squadron mess. What is the good of it all? What is the good of it all? He's a thoughtful man. He's thinking, why are we doing this? Those people, those empty chairs, those deaths. But of course, we're not in it. We can say, it's the photos, Mannock.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's why they're doing it. So he's still having problems. He's being unlucky. His guns keep bloody jamming. It's an endemic fault with machine. The guns do jam. His deflection shooting, when it is working, isn't very good. Deflection shooting is the art of shooting ahead.
Yeah, because of the speed. Yeah.
Is his eyesight a problem? I don't think so, because of what we've said. But it's May 17, he just lacked the knack of shooting down an enemy. It's like a centre forward who doesn't score goals. And then suddenly they start scoring. And he just didn't have that knack. Here's another account from the same time. My gun jammed again. Do you see what I mean? Keane was almost out of sight. My Aldous sight oiled up and the engine failed at the crucial moment. Everything's going perfectly, in other words. I thought all was up. We were 16,000 feet up at the time. I turned almost vertically on my tail, nosedived and spun towards our own lines, zigzagging for all I was worth with machine guns cracking away behind me like mad. The engine picked up when I was about 3,000 feet over Arras, and the Huns, for some reason or other, had left me. Somebody else had probably attacked them. That's what was going on. I immediately ran into another Hun after I'd climbed up to 12,000 feet again, but hadn't the pluck to face him. Ooh. I turned away and landed here with my knees shaking and my nerves all torn to bits. I feel a bit better now, but all my courage seems to have gone after that experience this morning. The CO was very good and didn't put me on any more line jobs for the rest of the day. You see what I mean? It's a real thing about sending him home.
Yeah, I mean, he strikes me that he's potentially suffering PTSD at this stage.
Already, perhaps, yeah. Because it happens much earlier than people think.
Yeah, I mean, people usually ascribe it to him in 1918, but actually it sounds to me now as if he's got early issues, shall we say.
He's got issues. Now, By this time, though, funnily enough, after that, he seems to get a grip of it, and he does get the knack. Now, I'm not going to go into this period a lot. I'm going to more talk about what he does. He develops a whole system of aerial tactics based on very diligent preparation of his men, because he eventually gets promoted flight commander, because people are going home on leave. You become senior very quickly in the Royal Flying Corps in 1917. Prepare your men, prepare your machines, true your sights, make sure everything's working, check everything, check the belts to make sure everything's perfect. Use an aerial tactics based on, caution. Now that sounds careful stalking of the enemy, working as a flight, working as a team, so that not just you've got people who are flying the same way, do the same sort of tactics.
Can I exercise some dumb insolence here? Maybe it wasn't necessarily for the benefit of his men. Maybe that's how he actually dealt with the problems of his nerves. It was for his benefit, but coincidentally, why wouldn't it be beneficial to your men to be better trained, better prepared, and have better tactics?
I think you're right. I mean, we can't ask him, but that sort of thing seems to come across in the diary. This sort of mixture of motives, I think that's sensible, very sensible. And he gets better and better. He starts putting his theories into action. He starts shooting people down. And Captain Gwilym Lewis, who was in the squadron with him. Now, Gwilym Lewis was an amazing old boy who was interviewed by my friend Brad King. I missed him. I wish I'd done him now. But he was fabulous. And he said this: Mannock was a hero of the squadron at that time. How quickly things change. He left the squadron with 21 victories, and his victories were good. He means he wasn't making them up, unlike some people. He came onto form having been older than most of us and a more mature man. He'd given great deep thought to the fighting and had reorientated his mental attitudes, which were necessary for a top fighter pilot. He'd got his confidence and he'd thought out the way he was going to tackle things. He became a very good friend of mine, and I owed a lot to him that he was so friendly. I was unnecessarily reserved, and he liked to give people nicknames. He called me Noisy. He was a lot of fun. And this is the thing, people keep saying this about him. When he goes home, he's sent home in January 1918. His tour of duty lasts from April to January. And in that time, as I said, he's gone from being accused of cowardice to being the hero of the squadron. We can't spend any more time on this thing because we've only got a certain amount of time. But if you want to read books on this, there's lots of books on Mannock. His own diary is available, and there are books by the great aviation historians. And of course, I've mentioned here Trevor Henshaw's book, which I can't remember the title of just at the moment. So that's a rubbish advert.
Yeah, he's going to really thank you for that.
He'll say, hey, The Sky There Battlefield, Volume 2. I hate you, Gary. Anyway, so he goes home and he's on training schools, he's done a fantastic job. He's got 21 victories to his name. He goes home, but he doesn't stay home long. In April 1918, he comes back into the fray as a flight commander, this time with 74 Squadron flying SE-5s, Scout Experimental number 5, Mark A. I absolutely love the RAF factory names. I think so much more romantic than Supermarine Spitfire. Scout Experimental Mark 5. Variant A. Come on, that's the stuff of legend. And it was a fast single-seater Scout. I think it's the greatest Scout of the war. Its greatest. It was fast-ish, fast as anything else. But the greatest thing was it was accurate. So, and best of all, in the dive, it was steady. It didn't judder. So it was great. It was made to dive down, shoot someone, and then regain altitude at the other side. And unlike the Camel, which was a bit like your dad's old car, which, when he was on the motorway in the 60s, used to judder when he went above 70 miles an hour, which is what, sort of metaphorically, the Camel did. This was a beautiful, smooth thing, so it was made for accuracy. Now, he went back and he was driven, he wanted to go back to the front. This is the weird thing about these aces. They're suffering from post-traumatic stress. I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's a natural thing. They're suffering from that, but they have a sense of duty. He's got a distinct nervous debilitation, and he should have stayed home, really. He should have stayed home. But he hadn't lost his touch. In fact, he goes on a killing spree. That sounds harsh, but that's what it is, really, isn't it? It's Lieutenant Ira Jones, 74 Squadron. He wrote the biography, Ace with One Eye, I think, later on. He said, he not only mystified and surprised the enemy, but also the formations he led. Once over the lines, he would commence flying in never-ending series of zigzags, never straight for more than a few seconds. Was it not by flying straight for long periods that formation leaders were caught napping? In other words, if you just went chug, 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 people could work out where you were going and ambush you, sort of thing. Suddenly his machine would rock violently, a signal he was about to attack. But where were the enemy? His companions could not see them, although he was pointed in their direction. This is the bollocks about Ace with One Eye. This is the bloke who calls him the Ace with One Eye, and yet it's clear that he's got a wonderful eyesight. Another signal, and his SE-5 would dive to the attack. A quick half roll, and there beneath them would be the enemy formation, flying serenely along, the enemy leader with his eyes no doubt glued to the west. The result was a complete surprise attack. One of his big principles was you come out of the direction you're not expecting, which is often from the east. In other words, you go around behind the German lines and come at them from behind, if you like.
Was he the only one using these tactics, or were others developing them?
That's the essence of the point you've got there. That's your innate genius coming out there, Gary.
I'll get my coat.
Because no, he wasn't the only one. I mean, Richthofen is doing exactly the same on the German side. A high altitude, dive down, surprise the enemy. The cutting edge, i.e. in Richthofen or Mannock, the real ace takes the kill. The others don't aim at the same one, otherwise they'll fly into each other, if you think about it, and just take a kill. And he had a fantastic motto, Mannock did. Now, this is my favourite bit of this talk. So we've spent, because if you have a number of hobbies, this advice is utterly invaluable to me.
I think it's invaluable to all men, frankly.
Well, yes, and I'm not going to say you put your finger on it because due to what I'm about to say. But if you are a First World War scout pilot, or a fell walker, or someone wishing to engage in sexual intercourse, this advice is invaluable. And I will read it to you, Gary, because it's not complicated, is it? Gentlemen, always above, seldom on the same level, never underneath. What wise words. Words to live by. Now, why is this important? Well, let's go. The sex thing, I think we'll leave to your imagination, Gary. I can see you are looking quite flush. But fell walking. Well, you walk along a ridgeline. You don't walk up and down the various hills because you'll knacker yourself. First of all, aviation. Well, here's Lieutenant Arthur Cobby, 4 Squadron Australian Flying Corps. They couldn't shoot anyone down, and they got Mannock in. So Mannock was sent to them just to go and talk to them. And he taught them this lesson. And Cobby took it on board. They started shooting people down after Mannock's visit. But he said this: go into a fight from above if possible. To illustrate my meaning clearly, take 2 armed men, each armed with a stout stick. One man is in a steep ditch, and the other on the bank above. The man in the ditch would be foolish to commence a fight with the other, whereas the man on the bank has the advantage of being able to commence a scrap if he so desires, or run away. The man below could not catch him, as he would lose time scrambling out of the ditch. This simple parallel governs the entire tactics of aerial fighting. So if you're above, you can decide whether there they are below. Oh, there's 10 of them and there's only 3 of me. Bugger that for a game of soldiers, literally. You just fly away and wait to see if perhaps they might split up. And you can get 3 of them on their own, or 2 of them, or 1. But not 10, too many. But then, if you're up there, you decide. You can dive down. They can't climb, because climbing is... It's not like now in a fighter where you just go whoosh.
Yeah, did they have to circle, I think, to get
a lot
high?
of them, or they could go... I mean, it takes time to gain altitude. So height is crucial, and Mannock has put his absolute finger on it. And what a great motto it is. I'll say it again. Gentlemen, always above, seldom on the same level, never underneath. And that but he's not the only person pushing this. Other experienced aces, you find people like McLachlan would entirely understand and be telling people that, but they weren't great teachers. Mannock had the ability to teach. He had an attractive personality. that people were willing to take things from. The other thing was his reputation, because people like Mannock were like supermen. If you think about them, they're like the real great footballers. I mean, most of them play for Liverpool, obviously, but people like those great footballers, you don't have many playing for Arsenal these days, do you? If I could think of one of their names, I'd say, but we won't embarrass you. But the Salah, for instance, he exudes power, and you think, wow. And Mane, these are names that are probably foreign to you, foreign to me in that sense. But they're these great aces like Richtofen, Mannock, McCudden. They seem on. That you come or I come, we join the squadron. What happens to us?
We die.
But they seem to live on forever. They're like gods. And so when they say something, people listen.
So can I ask a question, if I may? He seems to have been in competition. He develops a competition in his own mind with his good friend. Presumably he's in competition with other races. But he's actually quite callous in how he goes about some of this. Do you think that, perhaps his mental instability led him to be crueler than he needed to be?
He definitely becomes. He hated Germans, and people speculate this might be because of his experience in Turkey with the enemy, But a lot of it's speculation. But he explicitly hates Germans, possibly because they're the ones putting him through all this torture. Because he's scared, and it's all going on at the same time. He says this, even though he's claiming victims, he says, in the thick of it, things are a bit funny at the moment. I'm not at all content. Maybe it's okay. Within a line or two, this is from his diary, he's contradicting himself. Much work, much fighting, and much wind up at times, but okay at present. How many contradictions is he going to get into a 2 or 3 line sentence, When Richtofen is shot down on 21st of April, his reaction is, it's very... Do you know what he says? He says, somebody proposes a toast. A toast to our fallen enemy. And Mannock refuses to toast him, and he says, I hope he roasted the whole way down. He means he hoped he burnt to death. He didn't, but, now that's nasty. There's no code of the air. There never was any Knights of the Air crap. That's just mythology. They always, right in 1914, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, they're trying to kill you.
And I think there's a certain irony there, because I think later Mannock himself carries a pistol with him, service pistol with him, because he has this, he's totally convinced that he is going to die by burning to death. So there is an irony there, that he wished it on his enemy. It is.
It is. And he's getting more and more wound up. He's more and more incompetent. They call it score fixation or target fixation. And he starts fixating on his mate, McCudden, the one he used to go out chasing girls with. We've got letters in the War Museum. We're trying to arrange to go out and try and eat some floozies in London when they were both in London. And he says this, if I've any luck, I may beat old Mac. Then I should try and oost old Richtofen. That's before Richtofen died, but it gives you the tin. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. Then McCudden's killed in a stupid air crash. Not stupid by McCudden, but stupid. It's just so...
It's a waste.
It's a waste. He just takes off. He does a little bit of a circle and crashes. According to the great aviation... I'm not an aviation historian, but Alex Revel is the real doyen of and he says it was a wrongly fixed carburettor. But whatever the cause, McCudden is dead. Mannock's distraught. But now he's getting this flames business, going down in flames business, is getting out of hand. And this is Lieutenant Ira Jones. You listen to this, Gary, and see whether you think this person's in a good state. Whenever Mannock sends one down in flames, he comes dancing into the mess, whooping and hallooing. Flamerinos, boys! Sizzle, sizzle, wonk! Then at great length he tries to describe the feelings of the poor old Hun, going into the minutest details. Having finished in a frenzy of fiendish glee, he'll turn to one of us and say, laughing, and that's what will happen to you on your next patrol, my lad. That's not healthy, is it?
No, I think... In the modern service, somebody would have probably recommended that he was sent home.
Yeah, he should have been. I mean, here's another quote from him. Then listen to this chaotic jumble. I mean, things are getting a bit intense just lately, and I don't quite know how long my nerves will last out. I'm rather old now, as airmen go, for air fighting. Still, one hopes for the best. These times are so horrible that occasionally I feel that life is not worth hanging on to myself. But hope springs eternal to the human breast. You know, he's all over the place, all over the place. And one of the most tragic things I ever remember reading was... his friend in the Wellingborough Labour Party, you know, when he was in Wellingborough, Jim Isles. So he went home on a brief leave, and this is his account, and it's awful. It's awful. Mannock started to tremble violently. This gave way into a convulsive straining. He cried uncontrollably, muttering something I could not make out. His face, when he lifted it, was a terrible sight. Saliva and tears were running down his face. He couldn't stop it. His collar and shirt front were soaked through. He smiled weakly at me when he saw me watching and tried to make light of it. He would not talk about it at all. I mean, what do you think?
I think he was very ill, and I think he should have been sent back to England.
But he
wasn't. No.
Instead, they send him to take command of 85 Squadron. And this is interesting because this is one of the great class issues. 85 Squadron being commanded by William Bishop, the great Canadian ace. Whatever your opinions are of him, he was definitely Canadian. And he had taught them to drink, but very little else. And they were not under good... Most of the stories about drinking by then it was the RAF, come from that squadron. They wanted the authorities wanted to send in McCudden there, but you know this is before McCudden was dead. But they didn't want him because he was a working class oik.
So what did they make of Mannock? You know,
well,
son of a corporal.
They didn't know because McCudden by this time had got. This is all before he died. We're all slightly out of jumbly time, but it's difficult to conceptually. Yeah. But McCudden was clearly and well known by this time. They knew he'd joined as a private. They knew he was working class background. They didn't really know about Mannock. And Mannock is also much more clubbable. And I don't mean like you think I'm clubbable. You want to hit me with a big club. I mean, he was just hail fellow well met when he, when he joined 85 Squadron, he just worked at building up their efficiency. He didn't have long, getting them to fly in tightly controlled formations, leading the patrols, which Bishop was a solo motion.
And was it at 85 Squadron that he started sharing kills with some of the novice pilots?
He'd done that a bit. He'd done that a bit before, and this was later on very controversial, or can be seen as controversial. But basically, he would shoot if it was a two-seater, which he'd shoot out the rear gunner, kill the rear gunner, and then leave the
for somebody else to finish off.
And I don't know what you think about it. People say that's nice of him.
Not if you were German.
Well, if you're in that front seat,
you're waiting to die.
Your best mate, who has been splattered.
You're waiting to die.
You're waiting to die, and you're sat on a petrol tank.
Yeah.
It must. I mean, I don't think it's particularly nice. I know why he did it. He did it to break. He knew about the difficulties of getting that first kill.
So this is the breaking the duck thing again.
Breaking a duck, and he was willing to help. The other thing you were thinking of, I wouldn't advise sharing breaking your duck on that thing, but we'll perhaps.
Thanks, Pete.
So he was very, he was building up, but he's starting to break his own rules. How many? I mean. This is the same with Richtofen. Richtofen was breaking about 6 rules of his own rules when he was shot down. And Mannock starts being willing to fly low to attract attention. Believing he could get out of any situation by his ability to manoeuvre the aircraft.
Yes, because wasn't he very specific in his instructions not to, for example, follow an enemy down?
Absolutely. And he would tell other pilots off for this. He told a chap called George McIlroy about a week before he died. Mannock died. He would say, if you do that, you'll get killed. You mustn't follow enemy aircraft that you've shot down. You mustn't do it. And you really mustn't do it, And the thing is, it's a phrase my dad used to say. And I used to say, Dad, that's not fair. You're telling me, but you do it. Not do as I say, not as I do. And that was starting to sum up Mannock in this later phase. Before that, he'd followed his own rules, But now, I don't know, overconfident, just tortured soul, not able to think straight.
Because it's actually good advice, isn't it? Because the lower you go, the more weapons can actually train themselves on you. You can get shot at from the ground now because you're low. It's good advice. Don't do it.
And so why did he do it? Anyway, he did do it. And we come now to his death. I mean, is it sad? I don't know. It's a tortured soul for me, and I do feel sad. On the 26th of July 1918, Mannock takes up a young New Zealand pilot called Lieutenant Douglas Inglis. And Inglis couldn't break his duck. Simple as that. And Mannock takes him up. And 05:30 that morning, they see a two-seater LVG piloted by... I'm reading this because I think it's interesting to remember these people. Because the point I want to make is Mannock isn't the only person who dies in this engagement. And that's important because, we all say, oh, poor Mannock. Listen what happens to the other two. So let's remember the other two. Joseph Hine is the pilot and the observer is Ludwig Schoff. And Inglis has been ordered to stick close to Mannock's tail. Mannock was going to present him with a kill. So Inglis says this: a quick turn and a dive, and there was Mick. That's allowed. Shooting up a Hun two-seater. He must have got the observer, as when he pulled up and I came in underneath him, I didn't see the Hun shooting. That's exactly what had happened. I flushed the Hun's petrol tank. Whoosh! You're now burning to death, Gary. And just missed ramming his tail as it came up when the Hun's nose dropped. This is a classic beginner's mistake. But, falling in behind Mick again, we did a couple of circles around the burning wreck and then made for home. Now, the burning wreck, they were down to 600 feet. They were behind the German lines and there were machine guns on the ground. Guess which country those machine guns belonged to behind the German lines?
German.
Yeah, I tell you, there's no flies on you. Oh, by the way.
Thank you.
I saw Mick start to kick his rudder and realised we were fairly low. Then I saw a flame coming out the side of his machine. It grew bigger and bigger. Mick was no longer kicking his rudder. His nose dropped slightly and he went into a slow right-hand turn, around about twice, and hit the ground in a burst of flame. He died in a burning aircraft. And when they got back, people in his squadron, were just devastated. All the squadrons he'd served in. So Ira Jones, he was still back at 74th Squadron. He said, it was a difficult business. The thought of Mick's charred body not many miles away haunted us and dampened our spirits. There was more drinking than usual on these occasions. The decker, he means a gramophone machine, worked overtime. We tried to sing, but it was painfully obvious that it was forced. I mean, they were just devastated. Men that he'd trained, so 74 Squadron, 85 Squadron, the men in 40 Squadron he'd known. But his influence, so those guys in 4th Australia Squadron, they all, But, this is just part of what's happening at this time. I mean, people say, well, it was quite near the end of the war. No, it wasn't. It was 26th of July. He'd have to live a long, long time. Unless they sent him home, he'd have been killed sometime anyway. He's breaking too many rules.
And was it known, did he shoot himself?
Well, that was the thing. He always carried a revolver, which he said he'd shoot himself with.
Right.
And we don't know, because we don't know where his grave is. People are obsessed with finding where his grave is. And some people have done some great research trying to prove whether this grave or that grave is his grave, which anonymous. I'm not bothered because I'm pretty certain he's definitely dead now. And I don't see the point, For me, it was his career, and he's just so interesting. But you know what? Guess what difference do you think people, the deaths of people like him, Richtoff and Mannock, McCullough, they're all dead now, aren't they? In that but so by July they're all different. What difference do you think it made to the air war?
Well, probably very little.
And why is that?
Because it's bigger than one individual.
It's big. That's right. It's not a small air force now. There's thousands and thousands of them. And what's more, what are these lessons? How complicated are they? Always above, seldom at the same level, never underneath. That's not rocket science. Dive down in a formation, leader shoots first. Come out of the sun. I forgot to mention that was one of the... If you can't, should have mentioned that earlier, shouldn't I, chums? Come out of the sun, come out of a cloud, preferably the sun, so they can't look and see you. It's not rocket science, is it?
No.
And the lessons had been taught. So fundamentally, there are now lots of mini Mannocks and mini Richtoffens. They're people who've learned from the masters. And the fact the masters are dead doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that much.
So how many kills, if you'll pardon the expression, or victories perhaps would be a better word, actually made an ace, and how many did Mannock score?
Well, it's 5 claimed kills. Or victories, because earlier they counted almost, if you forced them down it counted, if they were out of control it counted, and gradually they tightened it up. 5.
That sounds quite low.
It is quite low. Mannock I'm going to give you 3 scores. I think that everybody overclaimed, because you can't tell what's happening in a dogfight or even if you dive down and shoot at someone, if you watch what's happening to your victim, someone else will shoot you down. So you don't see what's happening to the people you shot at. So everything is a bit up in the air. I think a likely score would be about 50. That's absolutely definitely shot down, in my view. I don't do the work. Great historians like Trevor Henshaw do the work on this. He claimed 61. And I think that's fair enough, but his claim was later raised to a somewhat dubious 73 on the grounds of that he'd shared claims. Now, the shared claims have been counted. You get half for them, and this is all a bit dubious. But there was a reason for it. Do you know what the reason is?
Was it something to do with there was a campaign to get him a VC about a year or so, I think, after the war.
Oh,
was
that's
it something
right.
to do with that?
No. Well, that was an ongoing. Yeah, I mean, he was the finest British patrol leader. Because couldnt was much more an individual killer. He was a competent patrol leader, but he wasn't inspirational, and So Mannock was our greatest. He was a British Richtofen, if you like. No, it was something else, because another ace was given. A British ace was the Canadian William Bishop claimed 73. Claimed 72 72 claims. That's the point. I'm such an idiot at times. And the RAF, the pilots, were not having it. They did not believe Bishop's claims. This is not the topic of this thing, so I don't want to go into it, but at the time they did not believe it, and there was a campaign to get Mannock's score raised to 1 more than Bishop, and this is arbitrarily raised to 73. I don't believe Mannock would certainly not have claimed 73 at the time when he was killed. He didn't. He claimed 61. And there you go. So there he is, lauded in you get all these history books, and it's written. The Empire's highest score at ace is Edward Mannock. I nearly micked there. Yeah, Edward Mannock. And I would imagine that he would have laughed. That's what I think he would have done. He would have laughed because he was that kind of man. If he wasn't having hysterics.
And if I may, Pete, I'd like to leave the last words to Mick Mannock himself. Gentlemen, always above, seldom on the same level, never underneath.
We must live by these watchwords.
Thank you very much, Pete.
Cheers, Gary.
Bye.